Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. From a very cold England, I hope to bring you a bit of warmth from our talk this evening and take you into the colourful array of items that I've chosen. Some Worcester, some not, but the lecture will show actually many other of the manufacturers from within the 18th century English production, because I'm going to be showing you some of the source material and focus on the designs and artistry of the enamellers themselves. So if I could have the second image, please, Sophie. If I could have the second image.
Sorry, it's not responding at the moment. I will just... Why is it not letting me do that? How's that?
Right, so you've got a single vase on, have you now?
Yes, I have. Yeah, we're there.
Fine. Okay. Right. So what we have now here in front of us is the most wonderful piece of opaque white English glass made in Staffordshire in about 1755. The reason that I'm showing you this extraordinary and remarkable large vase is that it completely encapsulates the vision, the perceived vision of Cathay from the enameller's perspective, and therefore the manufacturing owner's perspective. But also it ties in together these small and rather wonderful groups of enamellers, some of whom worked at Worcester, but some of whom worked at Birmingham or at Bilston. And these were people that Dr. Wall and the partners of the manufactory were able to see the work of in terms of the enamel production before Worcester started producing coloured enamels in the early period. So I'd like you to look at the image itself, and you'll see these rather amazing figures surrounded by animals. A lot of the animals have symbolism attached to them. We're in the year of the rabbit, for example, or we're going to be when Chinese New Year actually occurs. And you'll see rabbits within some of the enamelling that I'm going to show you this evening. So look at the form. The form is rather different to a piece of porcelain. If you think that the main perspective here is that this is formed by air, it's formed by somebody actually blowing into a glob of glass at the end of the pontil. So you don't get the characteristics that you would if the item is actually raised up by the hands on the potting wheel. You will see an altogether more balloon type characteristic. It's often the case when they survive that some of these covers don't exactly fit quite as well as a porcelain example. This is something to bear in mind should you ever come across something like this or wish to collect something like this. But because the white glass, you see, is blown into a blank and finished, and then it's allowed to cool down. But then when the enameller, rather like enamelling onto glazed porcelain, when the enameller comes to the white opaque glass, he puts the enamel on, rather like in the same way that he would with a piece of porcelain. The powdered metal compound, which is ground up, is put on with a gum arabic. And it's done in the same way with a piece of glass. But the glass then, of course, has to go back to the mouth of the furnace and to be heated up again enough to soften. So one often gets two pieces that go together that don't quite go together in the way that they did in the first time of their firing. Would have the next slide, please. We should have a drawing of the Worcester porcelain manufactory up at the moment.
We do.
Great. Okay. And the so coming back to Worcester now, we find this wonderful and rare drawing produced by John Doherty in about 1752-55. This shows the key of the manufactory itself. It shows in which part of the building at Worcester House many of the key workers were to be found. And if you look to the top right, just to the left of the key, you will find painters of enamels. This is where the painters of coloured enamel were to be found within the manufactory itself. Along to the side, along to the left, at number 5, you'll see the biscuit kilns, the blue painters, just to the right of that at number 6. And you get the impression now of this whole manufactory working at full stretch, producing the earliest pieces of the manufacturer's production. And the next image, please, is an engraving by Robert Hancock about 1755-56. It shows the west prospect of the Worcester porcelain manufactory with Mr. Holdship's new buildings. And you can see on the right, Worcester House, the wonderful ship, the trow. It's a little bit more than a trow actually in the middle. And the mast raises up in the centre there. People say that the buildings were actually nearer to one another, and it's a little bit of artistic license by Robert Hancock to show the trow, the method of transporting raw materials in and finished products out, to show the masts unencumbered by the detail behind. Next image, please. The celebrated Wigornia cream jug. Now, it's fair to say that in 18th century Europe, we found quite a different form of design to grow in tandem with the age of the Enlightenment. It was that of the Chinoiserie. It was a fresh, new, innovative, decorative approach based on figural and landscape scenes from the East. It was a capricious, imaginary and whimsical interpretation of perceived life, inspired by both factual accounts and pure fantasy. Fueled with designs from Antoine Watteau, Jean Pillemont, François Boucher, a vision of Cathay was formed and reached its zenith during this Rococo period. Chinese porcelain depicting sages and scholars within stylized landscapes had been imported into Europe since the late Ming period, and the subject matter appealed to the European sense of harmonizing man with nature. However, nowhere more than so in England did this style take such deep root within the abundant nature of the carefully crafted pleasure gardens, complete with tea houses, temples and pagodas, and all the Mandarin details thereof. Well, we certainly see that on this very individual, perhaps one of the most important pieces of the museum's collection, and one of the showstoppers, of course. Underneath the piece, I've talked about this before in one of the online series, the piece is very much, we would say also in the silver style, but it's copying Chinoiserie silver, and it's been beautifully coloured to resemble Coromandel lacquer in that way. But we're starting to see from a very early period these incredible perceived, imagined scenes that was the view of those enamellers at Worcester. If I could have the next image, please. A series of the very earliest of the porcelain made at Worcester, but also in the centre, a piece of an opaque enamel white glass. Now you're beginning to see that there is a relationship to what is going on around that. We have the Chinese figures under their parasols, richly decorated with their silks that have been amazingly arrayed here within the finest of all colours that the enamellers were able to deal with. On the right from the museum, a wonderful, and you can see the baluster-shaped vase here on the right, very much raised from the potter's wheel. The Chinaman, the Mandarin on the right there, looking rather English in a way, as when you look at his face, but I remember when I first went to work with John Sandon, looking at a piece of porcelain like this about 25, 26 years ago. And he looked at the face and said, yes, but he would speak with an English accent. And this is the wonderful sort of naive charm of the English enamellers producing what they know and understand to be a Chinese figure, but with very much a European face. Top left is a Lunds Bristol piece that was made before the manufactory began at Worcester in about 1749, 1750. But again, it's been coloured up and beautifully redolent of the similar type of coloration of the enamels that we can see. And on the bottom left, we have a piece of salt glazed stoneware from Staffordshire, probably dating to about 1745, 1750, with Chinamen that are very closely comparable to the opaque white glass vase in the centre, but also the early Worcester vase on the right-hand side. If we were to go back to the image of the large opaque white glass, we would also see, and we will see later in the presentation, that the interior border of the source boat again has a correlation with everything that we're going to be looking at from a number of different manufacturers. So we could have the next image, please. And there is the vase again. And there is one of the types of the borders. On the top left is a vase that is in the Corning Museum of Glass in the northern New York state. This type of chinoiserie decoration with figural and animal combined subject matter will also be shown in tandem with flying finches. They're generally very fat, almost birds that you might not think would fly, but there they are. They're painted very much by the same hand or the same group of people who perhaps started their work in Birmingham or Bilston, and then were drawn to Dr. Wall's manufactory in the early few years of the 1750s, or started at the salt glazed stoneware manufacturers within the ateliers or studios within those manufacturers. So we will see a lot of these correlations. And if you look up at the top, we get these, the top image, the top left, we see these very sort of stylized and rather strong individual rocaille border decorations that absolutely identify with both salt glazed glass and porcelain. If we could have the next image, please, which is a portrait of Johann Nieuhof, which you'll wonder why I'm showing you. Well, he was born in Ulsan, in a town in the county of Bentheim in the Lower Saxony, just across from the Dutch and German border. In the first half of the 17th century, the Dutch East India Company tried to break the Portuguese monopoly position on trade to Macau. When they did not succeed, they sent 6 embassies to Peking between 1655 and 1685. Their aim was to convince the Qing Emperor to open up trade relations on the southern coast in favor of the Dutch East India Company, although they ultimately failed. Nieuhof was appointed to the position of steward on one of these embassies, which travelled from Canton to Peking between 1655 and 1658. They were in fact the second embassy to try and gain the emperor's favour. The first was unsuccessful. Nieuhof's duty as part of the embassy primarily consisted of ceremonial matters as well as securing lodgings. But he was, however, specifically appointed to illustrate any and all of the city's palaces, temples, rivers, and other noteworthy buildings in their true to natural form. On March the 17th, 1656, after months of negotiations and discussions of tributes to be paid to the Chinese emperor and viceroy, the embassy left Canton by barge to travel towards Peking. The embassy arrived at the emperor's court in Peking in July of the same year. They hired the Jesuit scholar Johann Adam Schouw von Bell to be their translator, who warned them of the possible dangers and the required ceremonies to approach the emperor. On September the 24th, the embassy was received by the Shunxi emperor, and as dictated by their translator, the party performed the traditional kowtow. They had to do this, and they had to do this on a number of occasions. The whole party had to kneel from standing 3 times, and then go into the kowtow position, which is like a crouch with your head, actually your forehead, on the ground in front of the emperor. And they had to do that 9 times. So the standing to kneeling 3 times, and then the kowtow 9 times in front of the emperor in order for anything to occur. As failing to do so would most likely result in immediate refusal by the emperor, and then they'd have to come back and do it all again the next day. And this happened. As a result, the emperor allowed Dutch embassies to visit the court once every 8 years, in parties consisting of no more than 100 men. Any trading rights were not discussed at that particular point or granted at all. On October the 16th, the embassy was asked to leave the city of Peking within 2 hours. So obviously something occurred and they were told to go. Their return trip took exactly 3 months, and that put the entire length of the embassy to just short of 2 years. After returning from China, Nieuhof gifted his notes and illustrations to his brother, Hendrik Nieuhof, who collaborated with the Dutch publisher and engraver, Jacob van Meurs. Nieuhof left shortly afterwards, leaving the entire publication process in the hands of the publisher. And van Meurs turned Nieuhof's notes into a story and the illustrations into copper engravings for printing. In 1665, almost 10 years after the embassy's visit to China, the first edition of Nieuhof's Embassy of China actually was published. And if we could have the next image, please. And here it is. The English translation was published by John Ogilvie in 1669 and was entitled An Embassy from the East India Company of the United Provinces to the Grand Tatar Cham, Emperor of China, delivered by their Excellencies Peter Goya and Jacob van Coitzer at his imperial city of Peking, wherein the cities, towns, villages, ports, rivers, etc., in their passages from Canton to Peking are ingeniously described, also an epistle from Father John Adams, their antagonist, concerning the whole negotiation. Now, if we can go into the next image, you will see where we're at. it was very clear that that the book was going to give the first realistic representation of China. Nieuhof's travel account is considered one of the biggest influences on Western chinoiserie. And it is quite clear to me that the manufacturer at Worcester had access to a copy, perhaps through one of the notable partners, or perhaps a member of the gentry or aristocracy of the day, through the link to their library. And I think perhaps via Dr. Wall through the Sands and the Sands Library at Embassy Court. This is one of the links. It could be another, but this could be the case. And if we start to see the engravings that were engraved from Nieuhof's own designs and drawings, we can start to make sense of some of the decoration that we see at Worcester, and we see on glass, and we see on salt glaze, and some of the other manufacturers. So we have the Wigornia cream boat up on the top right, and then a wonderful harbour scene on the left-hand side from the Embassy of China. The diaries were turned into a story. So it's a wonderful description page by page of what they actually saw, with a little artistic and dramatic license. But one is also able to see some of the buildings and their juxtaposition to one another, which interests me hugely. Because on the right-hand side, we can see a design of buildings just like that, with perspective not hugely there, but creating one of these wonderful, naively charming representations of an imagined scene. We go on to the next image, please. We will see two pieces of porcelain from Samuel Gilbody's manufactory in Liverpool on Shaw's Brow, 1754 to 61, but very much in that the 1750s there. And on the top left, another harbour scene showing ships. Everything about chinoiserie was rather graceful and relaxed. It didn't pervade any sort of warlike imagery that we see, but rather, yes, natural evocations of landscapes, sometimes blending in with fantasy, which rather goes with the Rococo ideal anyway. But we do see very, very calm depictions of riverside scenes, harbours, and we can imagine ourselves on one of the boats going up these rivers to see these towns for the first time. And it would have been very, very exciting to do that. If you could have the next image, you can see some of the relationships with the figures here. Actually, all of the decorative art that you see at the bottom of the image, the three vases there, those are all at Corning, and they are all glass. But we are beginning to see some of the figures directly taken from Nieuhof. If you look top right, you will see the figure on the left in the top right, the man with the sword, and then look at the middle vase, and there you will see him on the right-hand side, absolutely taken directly from Nieuhof's Embassy of China. Next image, please. We show the large Staffordshire glass vase again at the top left, and seated on a raised dais made out of pierced rockwork, we see a seated figure, again taken directly from Nieuhof. It's the old Viceroy of Guangdong. A very, very rare piece of limehouse came to the market about 15 years ago. I show it on the right, again taken directly from Nieuhof's Embassy of China. This time, the old viceroy is seated on an almost checkerboard effect, which you can just see through the angle of the image. And if you look down to the left-hand side, you will see the draftsman's checkering on the floor in front of the Chinese nobility. And the next image, please. We find the supreme monarch of the China-Tartarian Empire on the left-hand side, standing very, very nobly. And equally, when we look on the right-hand side, the museum's vase, we see the exact same pose and the similar attribute with the staff of office on the left. And another image of one of the Corning covered vases. There are only about 2 of these that are recorded, showing similar figures. In the descriptions of the figures that we see in Nieuhof's Embassy of China, we often find that the enamellers have been might have been reading that as well, because the wardrobe of the Chinese characters are very strictly adhered to. The men with very, very close drapery around their wrists, but the women with much larger sleeves, and indicating that they're following not only the imagery, but also the description. And the next image, please. We again see the supreme monarch, and also on the left, a very interesting and rare flask of flattened oval form, showing how the enamellers are again following the damasked approach to the embroidery that is shown in the engravings from Nieuhof, very closely indeed. And on the right-hand side, a wonderful and very rare singular example of a large tankard from the Worcester manufactory, showing a representation of one of the Mandarin characters with voluminous silks around him, and great arabesques of embroidery. Some other images, the small ribbed cups and the dry mustard pot from the museum collection here. And I'm interested to show you these because of the correlation of the cover of the dry mustard pot, showing these similar flowering peonies that we find also on the opaque white glass, very small vase, only about 3 or 4 inches high, top left, and also the garden ornaments, the stools that you see in between the bouquets there of the peonies. And on the right-hand side are salt glaze stoneware, very refined pottery body there, again with similar stylized Chinese vegetation and flowers, and the garden ornamental furniture. The Worcester porcelain on the right, for example, the ribbed cup, showing a number of these similar correlations. We go on to the next image. We see some more of the way in which the enamellers are bringing together these similar decorative elements again, and a wonderful large teapot and cover with crabstock handle and spout and finial, showing also a spray of stylized flowering prunus underneath the figures that you often see in tandem with the almost flightless birds, the finches that we see on the top shoulder of the Corning vase. The next image again is more of these to tie in with. We have the figural imagery of the salt glazed teapot on the right, beneath a very stylized but firm border of stylized diaper, rather like the top on the Corning vase, and then two wonderful coffee cups of large size, much larger than we would see in normal terms, from the museum's collection, again with these racing Chinese figures coming into a garden setting with a crane perched up on a stylized fence, again, but the perspective is slightly altered on that. But again, the enamellers are one of these groups of people that were working in the early years of the manufacturing. Next image again shows the figures and the stylized flowers around the pieces where we've been able to turn them round. And then getting into the next image, we find a whole group of very, very rare Staffordshire opaque white glass, making it look quite common. It really isn't. It's one of the rarest of all of the decorative art that features within our passionate interest within the mid-18th century. There can't be more than sort of 150 to 200 pieces that are extant. To have a very large assemblage like this that was sold by Sotheby's in 1978 is really very rare indeed, and also very helpful to us because we can see enamellers at work that presumably and possibly worked either at the salt glaze manufactory or at early Worcester with Dr. Wall. And if we go on to the next image, we will find the museum's example of the wine funnel on the right with a stylized hooped rock with flowering peonies and other Chinese flowers. And on the left-hand side, very, very much the same sort of image, as the same sort of enameling here on a miniature opaque white glass vase. On to the next image, the series of extremely rare vases from Corning, showing a number of different decorative elements, from birds, from open peonies, passion flowers, even roses. On the right-hand side, it gives it an altogether much more European feel. But edging over to the left, we find the Figural images of Chinamen taken from Nieuhof. And up at the top left is one of the museum's hexagonal small bottle vases, which just show again how the item is put into this tradition of chinoiserie across glass, salt glaze stoneware, and porcelain itself. Now, if we look at the next image, we find one of the museum's triumphs, a wonderful ornamental ribbed vase of baluster form, beautifully decorated with open peony blooms and a bird flying at the top. And what I've done on the right-hand side is to show the Staffordshire opaque white large vase, and you can see the attribute of the flight of the goose in the just coming into the river is very, very similar in terms of the enameling detail to that of the bird at Worcester. And if you look very, very carefully, I promised you to see a rabbit. On the upper right, just to the right of the pierced rockwork, you will see something that looks a little bit like a small deer. It is a rabbit with its ears up. And the rabbit, of course, symbolizes longevity, mercy, elegance. It's one of the luckiest of the animals, and it always avoids fighting. A lot of the meanings and symbolism of the Chinese animals is very much in the same vein. Deer are symbols of longevity and grace, and wealth and nobility. Geese they always usually appear in pairs. They mate for life, and so they are a symbol of marital bliss and the passage of time. And the crane, of course, is long life, peace, and happiness. Our next image shows a number of Worcester pieces here from the museum. We have a wonderful ribbed, small but very, very rare ribbed cream boat with an angular handle with scrolled top thumb piece on the left-hand side, with a Chinese looking rather agitated bird within stylized vegetation. In the middle, we have a piece from Harry Hyams's collection at Ramsbury, which is a tiny and miniature opaque white glass milk jug, but very much in the same vein to the left-hand side of the museum's ribbed cream boat, and could easily have been done by the same group of people. We only find these people working at Worcester in the first 5 years. They don't altogether go on after that. It may be that because of the shapes and forms that had to be made far simpler in order to increase production for a very, very successful manufacturer at that time, that this altogether didn't sit right, perhaps, with the enamellers, who preferred their laboriously time-consuming individual styles that literally created a time problem. And so many of them possibly left, possibly went to work at Holt Bridgman's glassworks at Stourbridge. Some of them went, as we've seen, to Gilbody, to Samuel Gilbody's Shaw's Brow in Liverpool from 1754 through to 61. What I'm getting around to saying is that those that left Worcester to other porcelain manufacturers, we see their work going on to about 1760, and then fashion and style changes. Everything becomes far more European. Those that went to the Holt Bridgman's manufactory sadly had probably not a very long life. The substance that you put into the lead glass to make it go white is arsenic. So it was a very poisonous and toxic atmosphere. And I would say anyone that went there didn't last very long at all. Hence, probably, again, I remember a collector saying to me, perhaps that's why it's so rare. It's an obvious point, but it's probably the truth. On the bottom left of the screen, again, a wonderful group of chinoiserie and Chinese-inspired decoration. We find our little bird on the right again, on the little lobed coffee cup with the scrolled handle, very similar to the little ribbed cream boat up at the top left, and also Chinese figures on the wonderful snake in a basket pattern. And you can just see to the left of the Scots pine, or the Chinese juniper, should I say, on the teapot, you'll see a little small basket with, it's actually a walking stick put inside it, but this is why that pattern has come to be known as the snake in the basket. On to the next image, we see some of the birds that I've been talking about, these rather fat finches that appear sometimes on the back of the glass vases, we can see on the bottom right-hand side. But again, they have very much relevance to some of our Worcester pieces from the museum up above them. The great large jug there, we have a finch in full cry there. And also on the right-hand side, a bowl with similar finches over a stylized fence within flowering Chinese garden setting. And on the bottom left as well, again, a slightly more European type looking finch, but nevertheless related. we could go on to the next image, we can see how the finches correlate with an extremely rare, one of only very few examples, the teapot on the left-hand side, which is very early Worcester, probably about 1752, 53, no more than 1753. We will see the same finches that we see on the white opaque Staffordshire glass flying around the peonies on the left-hand side. And more of the finches there, and a rare bowl from Barbara Leake's collection showing the development of the finch beneath. If we could go on to the image with the two guglets now, which you should have in front of you. On the right-hand side, the opaque white glass one from an extremely important collection sold at Trustee's about 20 years ago. And on the left-hand side, very familiar to visitors at the museum. Again, one of the great objects, the guglet with the bird and the snail pattern. You can see the bird looking rather appetizingly at the snail on the left of it. This was from Thomas Burns' collection at Rouse Court. When Thomas Burn died in the early 80s, the then curator and director of the museum was allowed to go and choose several pieces before Sotheby's and Christie's got there, and this was one of the pieces chosen, and we're very pleased that it was. It's one of the only very early superb examples of a porcelain guglet in the world. We have it at the museum. They also significantly give us the date 1754 for these, because there are a series of about 4 or 5 tankards with the same pattern on, which are all dated 1754. So it's a good date to remember for this pattern. Now, the next image, which shows our wonderful Wigornia cream jug at the top again, and the top of the Staffordshire opaque white glass vase. I've put these on because you will see on the cover of the vase, there is a tied precious object. And on the inside of the Wigornia cream jug, there are a series of tied precious objects. The tied precious objects are symbols of good fortune, luck, and abundance. And they are tied with red ribbons, which again are all to do with abundance. So we can see a linking of the imagery and designs. The next image, please, is a series of vases, again showing the Chinese birds and the different sorts of birds that you can find. The top right, a very, very rare small vase from the Ashmolean collection, showing a bird that developed later on in Worcester's production, and there are plenty of examples to be seen at the museum of the Joshua Reynolds type pattern, which we see in the 1760s. But it starts here with this single bird on the turquoise holed rock. On the far left, a cream jug from the museum's collection with a ring handle and a bird looking down, as they do sometimes, perched up on a rather graceful piece of flowering peony, but looking down almost to look at us, as a bird or a chicken can do, if those of you who keep birds will know, or a parrot will look at you a bit like that. On to the next image. Right, so on the right-hand side, a piece of Staffordshire opaque white glass, again from Corning here in New York, and a saucer from the museum's collection in the middle, and the top left is a very rare Worcester baluster-shaped mug with Chinese figural decoration, correlating with the way in which the enamel is being put on. I wanted you to look at in this regard. I wanted you to see how watery it can be, and how almost like when you're spreading butter on a piece of bread, you get more opaque parts and more very translucent parts, which show how adept these enamellers were in creating texture and finish, and also a degree of three-dimensionality as well, because it is like looking at folds in drapery, and they were very much encouraging us to do just that in terms of our visual appreciation. The next image, please, shows a very, very rare, small, in fact, rather miniature vase painted by one of the best and most detailed hands at work at Worcester. You will see the correlation with the trees on the top right of the large opaque white glass vase. They're very similar. They're almost comb-like, and the three-dimensionality of the tree's trunk and the rocks on either side of it are built up with an almost micro-mosaic type of precision. You almost have to look at it under a lens to see that the work has been done by single hair brushes. That is the detail to which the enamellers went to, and the time-consuming process. For never would they be able to be absolutely sure that all their days and weeks' works would ever come to anything through if there were accidents in the kiln, which hopefully there weren't. On to the next image, please. And we see a jug from the museum's collection, probably a cider, wine, or water jug. These things had to be of many uses, but it's a remarkable one, and it shows these finches that I've been talking about. On the image of the teapot without its cover at the bottom of the screen, you will see again, they're almost flattened out, and they have this unique characteristic with the enamellers at Worcester, showing them almost from above in that way. On to the next image, please. And this shows an interesting array. We have white glass on the left, and then an acrobat bottle and small mug in the middle. Now, these aren't from the museum's collection, but they are represented in the museum's collection. So you can see what we term as an acrobat bottle, a small hexagonal form, and the Chinese figures are at play within a stylized garden, one doing a handstand on top of a board supported precariously by a seated Chinaman to the lower left. Now, it's on the other side of the teapot that we can see, which I showed you on the previous image, with the finches on the back of it. If we go to the next image, you will see there they are, the figures on the front. And that's the correlation between the two, or the enameller's work on glass on the left and the porcelain, the Worcester porcelain on the right. And if the next image can be shown, you can see a whole group of that within quite an important private collection. Figures on a teapot on the left, the acrobat bottle, the mug, and then a small wasted cylindrical coffee can on the right-hand side, beautifully illustrating this small group of enamellers' work. And then if we have the next image, another array of Chinese figural decoration. There cannot be anything more relaxing than looking at these very, very serene figures on Worcester porcelain. And the majority of the pieces that you're looking at, from the mustard pot top right in the museum's collection, the baluster vase that we've seen before from the museum's collection, and bottom left, the lobed coffee cup with the single figure under a parasol, again from the museum's collection, all relating to these very detailed figures that are essentially originally taken from Nieuhof and then used and developed at the manufactory within the first 5 to 6 years of the manufacturer's production. The next slide, the next image, please, again shows rare forms with sometimes remarkably amusing figural decoration on them. On the left-hand side, we can see 2 children playing, one being drawn fairly swiftly on a little platform on wheels, holding a flag. These little vignettes that are taken, sometimes if you look at the whole of the Embassy of China, you will see tiny little figures sometimes at play in the background. And these very heartening and sweet vignettes was something that the enamellers were very successful in achieving on these small pieces that would have delighted the collectors who were collecting these at the time to put in their china rooms, and you can imagine them showing these small and rare objects, causing quite a lot of mirth with the subject matter. If we have the next image, again, we find the figural decoration on 2 pieces of opaque white glass, but also similar garden furniture on the cover of the middle piece, and on the right-hand side, the small miniature piece. And then going nearly towards the end now, we find on the next image, we find a salt glazed stoneware slop bowl on the top right. Again, I've shown it with a cover of stylized flowering peonies from a teapot in the middle. And if you look down to the bottom right, you will see a teapot with finches and a cover almost exactly like the cover above it. And on the other side, you will probably now be getting your eye in, but if on the other side of that will be figures, Chinese figures under parasols with their Mandarin hats on, with their rather voluminous drapery and attire. On to the next image, and here exactly are they. The top left from the museum's collection, a seated Chinaman wrapped up. And again, Nieuhof goes into great detail about the attire, and he talks about the Chinese nobility, the males, having these close-fitting garments, but also having wraps around them, and describes the coloration also, which again is why the enamellers, we know that they must have been reading that, because you often find descriptions of blue gowns ornamented with yellow dragons within the text, or other descriptions, but these always follow on with subjects that have been taken directly from Nieuhof. We go on to the next image, we can see more examples of this extraordinary drapery. Bottom right, we've seen him before, but very, very splendid, a totally unique piece. We don't know of another with that type of subject matter, and with the tattered garments down below. And again, that's very interesting, because Nieuhof talks about the difference between the noble attire and the attire of, as he puts it, the commonality. He says essentially it's the same, but the commonality, as he puts it, is of much more ordinary stuff to be found, and usually that which is worn out, as he puts it. And well, you can see that's an example there in itself. Top right is one of our beckoning Chinaman teapots. There are several in the museum's collection. And this one dates to about 1756. It is on an early version of a Worcester flute. The fluting around this teapot takes its name, of course, from Worcester House, where the manufactory began in 1752. And on the left-hand side, in more tattered raiments, we see a Chinaman dancing through a garden with great abandon, with what looks like either a pair of castanets or a pair of figs, something like that, again, to joyfully uplift the spirit, which is what Chinoiserie does. Going on to the next image, we can see these figural, this figural type decoration again, and also rather moving at the top. Very, very rare example. It's a Chaffer's piece from Liverpool, but you can see these very sketchy rocks that were used with detail within them on the underside of the washes that we find particularly on a very rare teapot, bottom left, with this extraordinary, almost cailloute ground, but dotted up underneath with texturization. And then the next image is a pair of vases and the slop bowl beneath it, it should be. Yeah, it's one of the final images that that we've got, and I just wanted to bring it together towards the end of showing the glass, one of the finest examples of its type on the right. That is now in Cleveland Museum, and left. That is one of the finest examples of Worcester porcelain that we will ever see. It is in the museum's collection, and I ask you to come and have a look at it. It's not one of our showstoppers that we've chosen this year, but it certainly is one of the rarest of the large ornamental wares, and ornamental says it all. It's a far lesser percentage of ornamental wares that were ever made, and therefore that have survived, than any of the tea wares or the usable wares. It's one of our best pieces, and come and have a look at it. It completely encapsulates Chinoiserie to the most fantastical degree. Thank you very much.